بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah, today in our session on Today I Have Perfected Your Religion, we begin to look and we continue to look into the very, very early days of the Medinan era. The companions who were with the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca have completed the immigration to Al-Medina, and now the Muslims are trying to build a new community to reestablish themselves in a new land. They have no idea what's in store for them. They have no idea what's coming. And we know that this is the beginning of such a blessed time, a blessed era for Islam and for billions upon billions of people. So let's continue the exploration, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Last week, we looked at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah. Inshallah, today we'll continue to look at another section of Surah Al-Baqarah. And last week, we looked at how the Quran began this massive chapter by categorizing people within a society: believers, non-Muslims, and the hypocrites. And then afterwards, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about certain theological points, commanding mankind to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and among other things. And then for several pages, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the children of Israel. Now, the Quran goes into a lot of detail about the story of the children of Israel, especially in its regards to Musa alayhi salatu wassalam. And anyone who's read the Quran knows how many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Musa and his endeavors and his life. In fact, Musa is the most mentioned prophet in the Quran, and his life is detailed from the moment he is born until towards the end of his life. And we can categorize or we can separate his life in terms of how the Quran addresses his life and talks about it into three phases. The first phase is the earlier part of his life before he became a prophet. So when he was born, what happened when he was born, in his young adult years, when he fled to the city of Madian after accidentally killing the Coptic or the soldier of Fir'aun, and then up until he makes his way back to Egypt and he receives revelation. That's phase number one of his life. The second phase of his life is once he received the revelation, once he became a prophet, and Allah sent him to Fir'aun. From that moment where he meets Allah in the desert and Allah speaks to him, until the death of Fir'aun and the children of Israel's exodus into or outside of Egypt. That's phase number two. Phase number three of his life is post-Fir'aun, after Fir'aun was destroyed, and now they are in the desert wandering around for 40 years. And the Quran talks about these sometimes very concisely, gathers them all, or gathers two of the phases, or speaks in detail about one and doesn't go into detail about the other two. And so in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks a lot about the children of Israel, many, many pages, but all of it revolved around the third phase. After Musa and the children of Israel left Egypt, and Fir'aun was destroyed. So this era. Now, let us appreciate why Allah in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is one of the earliest Medinan chapters, is focusing on this phase of the life of Musa, how that parallels what the Muslims are going through during that time when these verses are being revealed. So prior to leaving Egypt, the children of Israel were oppressed, they were persecuted, they were dealing with a massive tyrant, in fact, the biggest tyrant maybe in human history, Fir'aun. Similarly, the Muslims, prior to leaving Mecca, they were being persecuted, they were being oppressed, and there were tyrants that they were dealing with. Of course, not at the level of Fir'aun, but nonetheless, they were dealing with tyrants like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab and Al-Walid ibn Mughira and Utbah, among others. So you have that similarity. Both of these communities, the children of Israel and the Muslim community, immigrated emigrated from their native lands. They left their lands to another land. Why? For the sole purpose, or just because they were being persecuted and then they were seeking freedom. And you have that parallel there. Likewise, when the children of Israel finally got out of Egypt and Pharaoh was destroyed, now they became an independent community, a community that is independent of external influences, independent of external and foreign hegemonies, and now they have to establish themselves. But there are no institutions yet. They really don't have a particular land. They're just wandering around the desert trying to find a land, or trying to reach the land of Jerusalem. Similarly, but not entirely the same, the Muslims are now in a foreign land. They are independent. Finally, after 13 years of belief, the Muslims are now finally independent of externalities, external influences, external hegemonies. And also they find themselves without any institutions. When they entered Medina, there was no masjid. The masjid they were praying to at that time was Jerusalem, the Masjid al-Aqsa. There's the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, but in Medina there was no masjid. There were no courts, for example. There was nothing, just a community by itself, fresh and completely new. So you have those similarities. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seems to be juxtaposing, putting these two communities side by side. But what's interesting about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents the stories of the children of Israel in this phase 3, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is revealing in Surah Baqarah, is that He's constantly telling the believers, look at the wrong things the children of Israel did. Don't be like them. Be careful. Because if you behave similarly, you will find similar negative consequences and you will fail. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace you with a new generation, as He did with the children of Israel. So let's look at some of these verses to try and see what Allah is teaching a Muslim community that is new. Again, remember, they're both fresh out of tyranny, left lands of oppression, and now they are trying to build something new for themselves. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by talking about children of Israel and saying how He gave them verses, He gave them miracles. Allah gave Musa miracles to help and assist the children of Israel. Ya bani Israel, اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم وأوفوا بعهدي وأوفي بعهدكم وإياي فارهبون. This is the very first verse. Allah begins in Surah Al-Baqarah talking about the children of Israel. What does it say? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O children of Israel, remember the blessings of Allah which Allah has blessed you with, and fulfill your agreement with me, and I will fulfill my side of the agreement. And don't be the first of the disbelievers. So here Allah is doing two things, it seems. And this is in no particular order, but one is that He's talking to the believers and saying, look, Allah told this to the children of Israel, the same thing applies to you. Remember the blessings of Allah has blessed you with. And the next several verses talk about the various blessings, like sending down a book. Allah has sent down a book also to the Arabs, these believers, the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved the children of Israel from Pharaoh. And Allah is telling the Muslims the same thing. He saved you from Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab and these oppressors and these aggressors. And of course, shortly after these verses, or during the time these verses are coming down, the Battle of Badr occurred, and these individuals were killed finally. Muslims were permanently relieved from their tyranny. Allah also reminds the children of Israel of the miracles He gave Pharaoh. He gave Musa alayhi salam. Allah is also telling the believers, the Muslims, look at the miracles I gave to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. appreciate those things. So look, this is so beautiful. The companions and the children of Israel, when this is being spoken to them, they don't have much. They have no institutions. They don't have much. There's not even an economy, very little economy, small. Yet Allah is telling them to be grateful for what Allah has already given you. And so it's as if Allah is telling us a successful community must be a grateful community. A community that is ungrateful is a community that is not going to succeed. But when a community is grateful, they will succeed. Why is that? This is really interesting. Well, perhaps, Allah Ta'ala alam, perhaps the reason is that when a person is grateful, they become more optimistic. Someone who's able to notice their blessings more will be more optimistic in life. These are the people, as psychologists say, they see the glass half full. They don't see it as half empty. And when a person is optimistic, they are hopeful. And if a person is hopeful, they can dream. They dream of things. I have a dream to do this. I have a dream to do that. And when we can dream, that means we are inspired and motivated, and we will pursue those dreams. Even if it means we have to start ground up, we will pursue it. And so a grateful community is a forward-thinking community. But an ungrateful person or ungrateful community is the exact opposite. They're pessimistic. They see the glass as half empty. They're more critical. They're more critical. And if they're more critical of life, they're going to be more critical of other people. And so they view life negatively. They cannot really dream. Anytime they dream or aspire towards something, it's automatically and very quickly crushed by their pessimism and their criticism. And so such a community is not forward thinking. They're just not thinking at all. Oh, look at this and look at that. Why did Allah do this and why did Allah do that? Why couldn't He have saved us before? Why did He wait this long? And after He saved us, He put us, on this barren land and we have absolutely nothing. What's the deal? From one hardship to another hardship, etc. Imagine if you're with someone like that. This is a very quick analogy. Imagine you're driving in your car and you have one of those people who always is interfering with how you're driving. Be careful, don't go too fast. Be careful, there's a stop sign. The light is red. Turn right, turn left. Not here. No, wait, be careful. That car, look at that. You won't be able to think. You're just so frustrated. How can I get this guy to stop talking or get this lady to stop talking? You no longer are paying too much attention to the road in front of you. Now you're paying attention to what's agitating you. And so a community that is successful needs to be grateful, because gratitude may lead to forward thinking. And we as Muslims today, we in a way kind of suffer from a lack of forward thinking. Yes, the oppression in the Muslim world, or at least parts of the Muslim world, causes this crushing force to any forward thinking. I mean, someone is living in one of these dictatorial countries, such as in the Arab world. I mean, no one's forward thinking, because in order to do anything, you need a government's permission, and the government is only going to permit that which is in the personal king's or president's best interest, or along with many of this nonsense that we see in that region of the world. And so people aren't forward thinking. There's no progress that's being made, absolutely not. But when you look at other parts of the world where there is more freedom, it might not be as free as we want it to be, but there is more freedom. Like Southeast Asia, that part of the world, like Turkey, like Muslims in the West. We've made a lot of progress over the past 40 years. I mean, when the immigrant community came 40 years ago, what was there? How many masajid were there? You were lucky if in the 80s there was a masjid near you. I know a lot of the elderly folk tell me that when they first came to America, the nearest masjid was about 100 miles away. And they would drive 100 miles every Friday to go to Jummah prayer. Look at that. They didn't have much. But because they were free, they built, and they were ambitious, and they were forward thinking. And that's what we need. And so Allah begins by telling us, "O believers, be grateful for what you have. And you will be successful through that gratitude." And Allah tells us, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. And if you're grateful, Allah will bless you, give you those blessings, and He will increase you in what you already have. So Allah is talking indirectly to the believers by letting us know of what the children of Israel were commanded in this very critical turning point in their history. To tell us, do these things and be careful to fall into the mistakes that they fell into, because that prolonged their difficulties. That caused them to weaken internally and externally, among other things. So that's one way Allah is using these verses. Another way is to talk to the children of Israel who are already in Medina. Now, the Jews who were living in Medina were, in lineage, they come from, Ishaq. So they weren't native in the lineage sense, in the ethnic sense, to Arabia, but culturally speaking, they really integrated into the Arabian culture. And so they were Arabic in the cultural sense. They spoke Arabic, but it wasn't as pure Arabic as the people of Quraysh. So they had a type of accent. They had a different dialect than those in Mecca and the surrounding areas, and those who are from Yemen. So Allah begins by talking about gratitude, and then talking about the various blessings Allah has had on the children of Israel in order for them in order for Allah to promote that gratitude and that sense of gratitude. And then I'm really paraphrasing here, choosing certain moments or certain verses in this long series of verses. One of the problems Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points to in these verses is how the children of Israel treated Musa alayhi salam. And what we find in several instances in these verses, Allah shows us how frustrated Musa alayhi salam was when dealing with the children of Israel. Why? Because they kept harassing him, they kept heckling him, they kept bothering him, they kept making things more difficult. So Allah says, "Am turidun an tas'alu rasulakum kama su'ila Musa min qabl." Allah talking to the believers and tells them, are you going to be like the children of Israel, how they used to ask Musa nonsensical questions? They used to make things more difficult on everyone by asking this, that, these, those, which one, who, why, where, when, asking all these unnecessary questions. And Allah gives an example when it comes to the episode of slaughtering the cow. Now, I'm not going to get into the details here, but essentially the story goes as follows. During the 40-year time they spent wandering in the desert, one of their community members was killed, was murdered. And they didn't know who the murderer was. So they went to Musa alayhi salam, and they asked Musa to ask Allah to reveal who the murderer was. So Allah tells Musa, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِمُوسَى إِنِّي أَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً. Allah says that He told Musa that I am commanding you to slaughter a cow. Meaning, if you want Allah to reveal who the murderer is, then slaughter a cow. Now, when we look at Islamic jurisprudence, Islamic epistemology, theory of Islamic law, you find that when they look at dilalat al-alfaz, the meanings of words in the Quran, sometimes words have a very general meaning, and sometimes they are very specific. And this plays into the legality and the application of our faith. Now, Allah told the children of Israel, slaughter a cow. What do we understand from this terming, this wording? Take any cow and slaughter it, irrespective of its age, its size, its gender, its color, its anything. Take a cow, anything that is called a cow, slaughter it. And Allah will reveal for you who the murderer is. How did the children of Israel respond? قَالُوا أَتَتَّخِذُنَا هُزُوًا. Their first response, are you making a mockery of us? What is this command? Slaughter a cow. Why? What's the deal here? What does it mean? This is strike number one, or mistake number one, I should say. If Allah tells us to do something, and it is clear what Allah is telling us, then just take it as it is. And this is precisely what Allah tells us. وَلَا تَسْأَلُوا يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَسْأَلُوا عَنْ أَشْيَاءٍ إِن تُبْدَ لَكُمْ تَسُؤْكُمْ وَإِن تَسْأَلُوا عَنْهَا حِينَ يُنَزَّلُ الْقُرْآنُ تُبْدَ لَكُمْ. Allah tells us, look, if Allah wants something to be specific, He will specify it. Such as the times of Salah. Allah is very specific when every Salah begins and when every Salah ends. He's specific. And sometimes Allah is general. And if Allah wants to be general, He is general. If He wanted it to be specific, He would have made it specific. But He kept it general. Just do it that way. And so stay true to how Allah is presenting the information and don't overcomplicate it. Don't do what the children of Israel did. They began by rejecting it. What do you mean? You're making a mockery of us. They begin by rejecting it, and that seems off. And we do find many Muslims who, when they are approached, when the Quran speaks to them, they have this reaction. What does this mean? This makes no sense. This seems backwards. How does this fit in our times today? This doesn't really fit with science. It doesn't fit with the culture. It doesn't. What is Allah telling us? No, it has to mean something else. That's a mistake. That's a huge mistake. Allah is telling us, don't do that. That is not an attribute of a successful community. Those who go into more detail than it needs to be. Those who make things more difficult than it needs to be. Leave it as it is. This is how Allah, the perfect, spoke and presented it to us. Understand it the way Allah has told us. No need to go into more details. And so then they start saying, what age should the cow be? Fine. You want to make it more difficult on yourselves? Let it be of middle age in terms of cow, the life of a cow. Go do what I have told you. Go do what Allah has told you. No, we need more information. What color should it be? Yeah, doesn't matter what color it is. Fine, you want to make it harder on yourself? Let it be bright yellow. Okay, well, in terms of its physical capabilities, what should it be? They kept making it harder and harder and harder for themselves. And this is a very difficult mindset to deal with. And so if there's a family member, a friend, a community member who behaves like this, they make it more difficult upon everyone. Everyone. And every masjid has an individual or two who's like this. Why is this like this? Why is that like that? No, we need to do this. We need to do that. We could do this better. We need to do this. What happened there? Who was here when? And they just make things difficult. They're a pain in the head. They're a headache, as we say. We cannot be like that. Now, of course, there will always be an individual or two who is like that. But when the entire community is like that, that's very problematic. And so what does the Prophet ﷺ teach us? Yassiru wa la tu'assiru. Make things easier, don't make things difficult. Bashiru wa la tunaffiru. Be someone who gives glad tidings, with a smile on their face, not someone who causes people to disperse from around them, causes people not to want to come to the masjid. Make things simpler, make things easier. Our religion is meant to be simple, right? This doesn't mean everything in our religion is super easy. Fasting isn't always easy. And for some people, fasting is more difficult than others. Sometimes coming to Fajr isn't the easiest thing to do. Coming to Isha prayer after a long days of work isn't the easiest thing to do. But nonetheless, we do it. But when we do it, let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple so that more people are able to participate from it, and we can focus more on the more important parts of what we are doing, instead of these small and insignificant details. The main purpose of Salah is khushu'ah, not the thobe you are wearing. not whether or not you have a miswak with you. It's the khushu' part. Now, it is part of the sunnah to wear nice clothing and to, brush your teeth prior to salah or when you make wudu, no doubt. But when that becomes the greater concern of the community, then khushu' and the community coming together to worship Allah and the dhikr of Allah and the coming closer to Allah, that's a community that is flipping around the purposes of the religion. And that's a community that doesn't really understand the religion itself. And it's a community that's not going to really flourish much. And one of the main challenges we have in America, in fact, this is one of the beauties of the Muslim American community, but nonetheless, one of the challenges is the diversity. It's so beautiful to see Muslims from across the globe participate in one masjid, praying with each other, seeing each other, greeting each other. But the fact of the matter is, and this is very unfortunate, there's still a lot of cultural baggage that we have on our shoulders that we still haven't shed. And so the Arab would, is less likely to give salam to the brother or sister from the South Asian community, and someone from this country or the people from this country are very isolated. We're just going to do things our way. We don't want other people to come in. And although I appreciate and I understand culture, live your culture with your people, but don't let the culture come between you and your fellow Muslims. When we start to focus on these things, which Allah does not care about, Allah is not going to ask you what culture you are from. He's going to ask you, did you pray your 5 daily prayers? He's not going to ask you what color your skin is. He's going to ask you about whether you gave your zakat or not. Allah is not going to ask you what country you are from. He's going to ask you whether you fasted Ramadan or not. Allah isn't going to ask you, He's not going to ask you how loyal you were to your country or to your president or your government, but He is going to ask you, how loyal were you to your fellow brothers and sisters? Did you help them when they needed help? Did you assist them? Or did we hold on to our discriminatory ways? A very difficult challenge, but it's something we can overcome. And it's something Allah is telling us through the story of the children of Israel. Don't overcomplicate things. If someone in the community is doing good work, support them, irrespective of who or where this person comes from. Support them for the good work they are doing, not because they are of the same color or country or culture or ethnicity as you. That is a community that flourishes. But as soon as we get into the unnecessary details, the unimportant details, we lose focus of what really gives us success. And so we'll go ahead and stop here in terms of the children of Israel, and we'll continue next week بإذن تعالى. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.